Yes. Hi, Tom. Hi, everybody. I just want to ask you, from your knowledge in the Sanskrit, what is the difference between vasana and samskara? Is the same thing, or they are two different things? From my knowledge, they are the same, but sometimes I see them on samskara, sometimes I see them on vasana. So maybe I'm wrong. My guess is that it's the same. This is one question. And how we can reduce these vasanas? If you can tell us a way to burn these vasanas. Thank you.
You're very welcome, Walter. Okay. I actually, when I was reading these scriptures, when I first started reading these scriptures, and I came across these words, vasana, samskara, I had exactly the same question, Walter, as you. And I did some research into it. I brought up Google and had a little look around, and there are differences, but the confusing thing is that different schools of thought define these words differently, just to make it more confusing. So, a yogic school may define it one way, another yogic school may define it another way, a Vedanta school defines it one way. For those of you who have no idea what we're talking about, just to make it clear, vasana means the habitual tendencies. This is how I usually translate it. So if you enjoy eating chocolate, then we can say you have a vasana for eating chocolate. You have a habitual tendency towards chocolate eating. And if you don't like eating chocolate, then that's also a vasana. That's a vasana for not liking chocolate. These are habitual tendencies. Now you also hear the word samskara. Now I would think of these words interchangeably. Now I think the simplest way is to say both these words mean habitual tendency. But some people will say that technically that a samskara is like let's say the groove on the brain, that the brain tends to go down a channel, like a groove on a record. The brain tends to go down a certain way, tends to have certain desires. That groove is the samskara. But when that samskara is acted out, then that's the vasana. So what that means is that, say I have a vasana for eating chocolate, there might be a desire welling up in my mind. Ooh, I want to eat some chocolate. I want to eat some chocolate. But I don't actually act on it. When I start to act on it, I open the cupboard where all the chocolate is kept, and then I open the door, and then I start getting chocolate, unwrapping it, eating it. That's the vasana, some people will say. Something like this. So the samskara is more the latent seed, the potential, and then the vasana is the acting out of it. Yeah. Now, just to make things more confusing, in other schools, they use exactly the same two words in exactly the opposite way. Right? Of course they do. Of course they do. Just to make it confusing for seekers. And they will insist that, and then you get some pundits. And a pundit is someone with book knowledge, book only knowledge, intellectual knowledge only. And some will claim this is exactly what it means, and that's exactly what it means. But essentially, I would think of these two as the same thing. It's very difficult to know what they mean. You tend to see the word vasana more used in Vedanta nowadays, and you tend to see samskara nowadays used more in yoga, or maybe Buddhism as well. But if you go back in the historical texts, they're all used in different ways. And we should realize this is not that surprising. If we're dealing with a tradition that's over, several thousand years old, 4,000 or 5,000 years old, it's not surprising that these words are used in different ways. And the tradition is not one tradition. It developed slightly differently in different geographical areas in what we now call the Indian subcontinent and the areas around. Yeah. Second question Walter asked was how to reduce these vasanas, how to burn these vasanas. Shankara wrote a very famous verse. He said, liberation is the destruction of vasanas. The destruction of all vasanas is liberation. Moksha, which means liberation, and vasana, kashaya, kashaya or kashaya. Vasana kashaya means destruction of vasanas. So many people think, well, if I can reduce the vasanas, then I can be on my way to destroying them. There are many ways to reduce vasanas. For example, if you have a vasana for eating chocolate, maybe there are some ways you can go about reducing that vasana. I won't go into that. You can substitute chocolate for any other object or experience that you are desiring to get more of or desiring to get less of, depending on if it's a positive or a negative object or experience. There are many ways to reduce your vasanas. Yeah, do you see? But if you take everything vasana by vasana, habit by habit, desire by desire, fear by fear, insecurity by insecurity, you'll be doing it forever. Yeah. That doesn't mean it's not worthwhile. Doesn't mean you shouldn't bother trying to get rid of your chocolate vasana or your sugar vasana or your, couch potato vasana or whatever vasana you happen to have. It's fine to try and manage your vasanas. It's healthy to manage your habitual tendencies, your desires. This is part of being a healthy human being. You can't, if you just do whatever you want to do all the time, generally that doesn't leave us in a very good place. There needs to be some kind of intelligence and control. That's just the way the human body is. The human body wants to do as little as possible and eat as much as possible, generally speaking. Yeah, if you just live like that, you'll find physically you'll run into health problems. Psychologically, it'll probably cause problems too. This is just the way the body is kind of programmed because of its genetic and biological conditioning. It's the way it's been programmed. If it sees sugar, which is pretty rare in nature, just lots and lots of sugar is pretty rare. It will go, oh, lots and lots of sugar. I better eat that while I can. Let me guzzle that. And those sorts of instincts are in us now. But liberation is the destruction of vasanas, which means the destruction of all duality. It also means the destruction of all action, also called karma, destruction of all karma. And there's only one way to do that. And that is to remove ignorance. And there's only one way to remove ignorance, which is to remove ignorance. And the only way to remove ignorance is to inquire into what you are, self-inquiry. When you inquire into what you are and you discover what you are, that's called self-knowledge, which is why Shankara also said the only way to vasana kashaya is through atma jnana. Atma means self, jnana means knowledge, self-knowledge. Knowledge, jnana is the only way, which means jnana is moksha. Knowledge, self-knowledge is liberation. The only way to get self-knowledge is to direct our attention towards the self, which is self-inquiry. So attenuation, which means reduction of the vasanas, there are many ways. Many ways you can do things with the body, yogic practices. You can pray. You can just sheer willpower, abstinence, things like this. You can watch the breath. You can lead a very disciplined life. But none of these by themselves will lead to vasana kashaya, which is destruction of all the vasanas. So, self-inquiry. It always comes back to self-inquiry, which is the same as self-surrender, which is the same as love for Bhagavan. Because Bhagavan is ourself. When we love something, we place our attention towards it. We focus on it. We give our loving attention to it. And that loving intention turned towards ourself, towards Bhagavan, is devotion and all-consuming love for Bhagavan. So if you have all-consuming love for your Guru, Bhagavan, your Guru, which is the I Am within, and we attend to that with devotion, without delay, then this leads naturally to Vasana Kashaya. What it actually leads to is not the destruction of vasanas. What it actually leads to is a realization, if I can use that word loosely, a realization that vasanas never arose, that duality never arose. Destruction of the vasanas is destruction of duality. But it's not that duality is destroyed, it never arose in the first place. Removal of ignorance, destruction of ignorance. It's not really destruction of ignorance, it's realization there's never been any ignorance. There's never been any original sin. There's never been any ego. There's never been any separation. What we can call it destruction of ignorance, destruction of the vasanas, destruction of karma, destruction of sin, absolving us of all our sins. It's the same thing. Does that answer the question, Walter?
Yes, almost every time when I ask you something, the answer come during the question. When I ask you, I don't know why. I say maybe it's better to shut up. Maybe the answer will come. But all the time after I ask you, I get now you know what it was the answer. Just be still. When the thought, whatever come into your mind is a vasana, just shut up, be still, and this is the fastest way to burn the vasana. This come to my mind. I don't know if it's right or this what. Just to be still, to be quiet.
Yes, that works too.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. You give it a go and you let me know what happens with that. What you'll find is that the only way for that stillness to last is through self-inquiry. But don't take my word for it. When Bhagavan says be still, he means do self-inquiry. Because the only way to be still is to abide as the self, because the self is the only thing that is still. Everything else is moving. So the only way you can be still is to become the self, which is that which never moves, which has no movement in it. As long as there's time, there's movement. Because they're the same thing.
I told you there are two different, the Bhagavan approach is one is to be silence and one is the self-inquiry. So there are two ways. So what you are saying now is actually is one?
It's one way, of course. Yes. There can only be one way to oneness. Ultimately. The only way to oneness is to be one, to be that oneness. The only way to be still is through self-inquiry. This is what Bhagavan tells us in Who Am I? The text Who Am I, isn't it? Let me see. In the text Who Am I? Question 12. In Who Am I? From the Collected Works. Question 12. Are there no other means for making the mind quiescent? That means being still, being quiet. Are there no other means for making the mind quiescent? Answer: other than inquiry, there are no adequate means. If through other means it is sought to control the mind will appear to be controlled, but will again go forth. Through the control of breath also, the mind will become quiescent, but it will be quiescent only so long as the breath remains controlled. So when Bhagavan says be still, lots of people superficially quote Bhagavan in his teachings and have never really made a sort of attempt to understand his teaching on a deeper level. And they say, I hear it all the time. Ramana's main teaching was silence, which means I don't need to read any stuff he's written. I don't need to look at his teachings in any detail at all, because his main teachings are in silence. And anytime anyone quotes any of Bhagavan's teachings at me, I know they're all wrong because his main teachings are in silence. This is the attitude of some people. But what does it mean when he says silence? He means the self. Silence means the self. It's silence with a capital S. It's not just, musical statues being still, being quiet. It's not like hide and seek when you're hiding in the corner of the room, quiet, hoping no one can find you. Is that the teaching? The silence he's talking about is a deep, deep silence in which there is no appearance of the body, the mind, or the world. The body is noise. The mind is noise. The world is noise. None of those are silence. So how to go beyond the body, the mind, and world? It's the only way is to go towards the self. This and this alone will take us to silence. Question 12 again. Are there no other means for making the mind quiescent? Answer: other than inquiry, there are no adequate means. Other ways of quieting the mind are temporary because they rely on something temporary, an object which comes and goes, the breath, an idea, an ideology, a vasana to quieten the mind. These all have limited results. Only the unlimited can lead to the unlimited. Luckily, we are the unlimited, so we can get there very easily through just being ourselves. But don't take my word for it. If see, Walter, follow what you think is right, and then you will come to see, I hope, the truth of Bhagavan's teachings for yourself.